The Mafia boss humiliated the black maid. What happened next left the room speechless. Tasha Williams, a dedicated maid in a grand mansion, had been working tirelessly for months. She had always been treated as invisible by the guests and the rich, working for the powerful Mafia boss, Vincent Romano. She wasn't new to being overlooked, but today, something felt different. She had been assigned to serve a high-profile dinner, and her nerves were on edge. She had spent hours making sure everything was perfect. The lavish table settings sparkled under the chandeliers, the finest wines lined up, and the guests were elegantly dressed, talking about everything from business deals to the latest gossip. Tasha, wearing her usual maid uniform, felt out of place, but she did her job with quiet efficiency. As she approached the table to refill the wine glasses, she could feel the eyes of the guests on her. One of them, a wealthy woman with a sharp smile, made a loud comment about Tasha's uniform, calling her a simple maid who would never understand the finer things in life. The comment stung, but Tasha had learned to keep her head down and ignore the slights. However, today, the words hit harder. She continued to serve, but her hands were shaking. It wasn't the first time she had been humiliated, but there was something different about this moment, as if the room's judgment had become too much to bear. Tasha's eyes flickered nervously to Vincent Romano, who was sitting at the head of the table, his cold gaze scanning the room. He hadn't said anything to stop the mocking. Tasha felt the heat rise in her chest. The laughter at her expense grew louder. The room felt suffocating. She had to fight the urge to break down right there. Then, just as the conversation about her continued, something unexpected happened. Vincent stood up, and for the first time, his attention shifted from the ongoing conversation to Tasha. The room quieted as his sharp eyes locked with hers. He was a man who commanded respect, feared by many. His power radiated through the room, but it was his next move that would silence everyone. Vincent's gaze softened just slightly as he walked over to Tasha, who stood frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Without a word, he turned to the woman who had mocked her, his expression cold and unreadable. He told her in a firm voice that the evening was over for her, canceling the event that was meant to bring about a business deal. The guests were left speechless, stunned by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Tasha, still trembling, watched as Vincent looked back at her, his face now showing something that almost resembled concern. He asked her quietly, "Are you okay?" Tasha couldn't believe what was happening. The harsh words she had heard only moments ago felt like they had never been spoken. Her breath hitched, and for the first time that evening, she felt seen, truly seen, by the man who everyone else feared. She simply nodded, unable to speak. The moment was fleeting, but in that brief exchange, something inside Tasha shifted. For the first time in a long while, she felt respected, and that respect came from the most unexpected place. The room was still as silence hung heavy in the air. Tasha Williams stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as she processed what had just happened. The humiliation she had faced moments before seemed to fade into the background, replaced by an unexpected sense of validation. Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss, the man whose name was synonymous with power and fear, had stepped in to defend her. His cold, commanding gaze had turned into something gentler, something that gave her hope she had long given up on. He had not only dismissed the guests who had mocked her, but had done so with such authority that it left everyone, including her, speechless. Now, with the room quiet and the attention shifted back to her, Tasha felt the weight of the situation. She had been the target of cruel mockery, yet here she was, standing before the very man who controlled everything in this room, the very man who had just changed everything. Her heart raced, and she could barely comprehend the events that had unfolded so quickly. Was it real? Did he really just stand up for her? As the minutes ticked by, the party continued, though the mood had shifted dramatically. The guests, still stunned by Vincent's actions, whispered among themselves. It was rare for the Mafia boss to show such personal care for anyone, let alone someone in Tasha's position. She had always been invisible to them, a mere background character in their luxurious lives. But now, something had shifted, and she couldn't quite grasp what it meant. Vincent's presence, his powerful aura, had not only changed the course of the evening, but had also transformed the way Tasha saw herself. She had always thought of herself as insignificant, just a maid in the background of a world she would never belong to. But in that brief moment, When he had stepped in and silenced her tormentors, she felt a spark of something she had long forgotten, her own worth. She had been ready to leave, to retreat into the shadows and accept her place in the world, but Vincent had forced her to acknowledge that she deserved more. She had no idea how this would change things, but she knew it had. The evening moved forward, and Tasha went back to her duties, though her steps were lighter now. She moved with a new sense of purpose, her head held a little higher, her heart a little stronger. Vincent's actions had given her more than just respect in that moment. They had given her hope. As the night wore on, Tasha found herself crossing paths with Vincent more than once. His eyes would meet hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold indifference in them. It was as if he was silently acknowledging her, recognizing her in a way no one else had before. She had been invisible for so long that the attention, though minimal, felt like a beacon in the darkness. And then, at the end of the evening, as the last guests began to leave, Vincent approached her. His steps were purposeful, his expression unreadable as always, but there was a softness in his gaze that she had never seen before. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice low but sincere. Tasha blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he turned to leave. "Take care of yourself, Tasha," he said over his shoulder. It wasn't much, but to her, it felt like a world of difference. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And in that fleeting moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone worth acknowledging, someone worthy of respect. The night ended. But for Tasha, it marked the beginning of something new. She didn't know where it would lead or what would come of it, but she was ready to face whatever happened next. The path ahead might still be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she felt empowered. As the last lights flickered out in the mansion, Tasha walked away with a renewed sense of purpose. The world she once thought was so out of reach now seemed like it could be hers for the taking. The days following the party were a blur for Tasha Williams. The high of Vincent Romano's unexpected act of kindness faded into the reality of her daily routine, but something within her had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer the quiet maid who could be overlooked. She had been seen, truly seen, by someone who commanded respect from everyone around him. Yet, even with this new sense of recognition, Tasha found herself struggling to understand what Vincent's actions truly meant for her. She couldn't forget the way his gaze lingered on her, the way he spoke to her like she wasn't just another servant in the mansion. But it was the small moments that followed that would begin to reveal what Vincent's interest in her might truly mean. Days turned into weeks, and Tasha continued to work with the same diligence as before, but now she couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. Every time she crossed paths with Vincent, his eyes would meet hers, and there was always a slight, almost imperceptible, change in his demeanor. It wasn't the cold, calculating gaze she had grown used to over the months. Instead, there was something softer there, something almost caring. But Tasha wasn't sure how to interpret it. She was still the maid, and he was still the Mafia boss. There was no place for anything else between them, or so she thought. One afternoon, as Tasha was tidying up the drawing room, Vincent appeared unexpectedly, his steps purposeful as always. He didn't speak right away but instead stood by the door, watching her as she dusted the furniture. His presence made her heart race, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, even without turning to face him. "Tasha," he finally said, his voice low and steady. She froze, caught off guard by the sound of her name from his lips. "Yes, sir," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to speak with you for a moment." His tone was neither commanding nor cold, but something more personal, as if he truly wanted her attention. Tasha hesitated but nodded, setting aside the cloth she had been using to dust the mantel. She wasn't sure what to expect. He motioned for her to follow him, and she did so without question, her steps light but filled with uncertainty. They moved down the long corridor to the private office Vincent had been using more frequently lately. The heavy wood door closed behind them with a soft click, and for the first time, Tasha found herself alone with him in a room that felt much more intimate than the grand spaces where they had crossed paths before. Vincent gestured toward a chair across from his desk. "Please sit," he said. Tasha, though nervous, obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she sat down. Vincent stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the city beyond. His back was to her, but she could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words hanging between them. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "You're doing well, Tasha. The work you've been doing, it doesn't go unnoticed." The words were simple, but they struck her deeply. No one, not even her fellow staff, had ever praised her like that. Not to mention that it was coming from Vincent Romano himself, the man whose approval was sought after by so many. "Thank you, sir," Tasha said, her voice soft but genuine. There was a brief silence before Vincent turned to face her. "I want you to know," he began, his tone a bit more serious, "that you're not just another face around here. You've proven yourself more than capable, and that matters to me." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure how to respond to such a direct admission. It was unlike anything she had ever heard from him, or anyone, for that matter. She nodded, unsure if she should speak or just wait for him to continue. Vincent took a few steps toward her, his presence commanding yet not overwhelming. "I don't expect you to understand just yet," he said, his voice softening. "But I've been watching you, and I see something in you that not many people do." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Was he speaking of her work? Or was there something more? "I appreciate your hard work, your dedication," Vincent continued. "But more than that, I respect you. There aren't many I can say that about." His words were unexpected, and they made Tasha's mind race. She had never thought of herself as someone worthy of respect, especially not from someone like Vincent. She had always been the invisible worker, the one who did the dirty jobs without question. Yet, here he was, telling her that he respected her. Tasha felt a swell of emotions she hadn't known she could feel. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that she might be more than just the maid. She might be someone who could stand on equal footing with the powerful Mafia boss. But then doubt crept in. She was still the maid, and he was still the man who ran everything. She had no place in his world beyond her duties. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't let you down." Vincent gave a small nod, his expression thoughtful. "I know you won't," he said, "and that's why I'm giving you a choice." Tasha looked up, confused. "A choice?" she repeated. Vincent smiled faintly, his eyes locking onto hers. "There's an opportunity for you, Tasha. I want you to consider it. But it's up to you." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "You don't have to stay in this position forever. I can offer you more. But first, you need to decide what it is you truly want." Tasha sat in stunned silence. The idea of a different future, one where she wasn't just a maid, seemed impossible. But with Vincent's words lingering in the air, it also felt like it could be within reach. Vincent's words hung in the air, thick with possibilities, and Tasha found herself lost in thought. The idea of a new opportunity, a future outside of the constraints of being a maid, seemed impossible. But here was Vincent, offering her a chance she had never dreamed of, a chance to step outside the life she had been stuck in for so long. She sat there, the weight of his offer pressing down on her, but she couldn't shake the uncertainty that followed. What did he see in her that made him offer such a thing? Was it just out of kindness, or was there something more he was expecting in return? She had spent her life in service to others, blending into the background, never daring to ask for more. But now, for the first time, someone was offering her a glimpse of something greater. It felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "I don't know what to say." Tasha finally spoke, her voice quiet, almost unsure. Vincent turned to her, his expression softened but still serious. "You don't need to decide right now. Take some time. Think about what you want." His words felt like a lifeline, offering her the space to breathe, to consider her options. But the reality of the offer still weighed heavily on her. She had always known her place, had always understood that she was just a maid, just a servant. The thought of stepping into something more felt like a leap into the unknown. And yet, the idea of remaining in this world, of continuing to fade into the background, seemed more unbearable than ever. Vincent studied her for a moment, as if sensing her inner turmoil. "I don't want you to feel pressured," he said, "but I think you deserve more than this." His words were simple, but they carried a depth of meaning that Tasha couldn't fully grasp. "I can offer you something different. A role that shows the value I see in you. You've proven your worth more than anyone here." She could hear the sincerity in his voice, and for a moment, she wondered if he truly meant it. She had never been told she was valuable before. Her whole life had been built on the notion that she was nothing more than a servant, someone who existed to fulfill others' needs. But now, Vincent's words made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was worth more. "I'm not sure what I want," Tasha admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never had the chance to think about it. I've always just done what was expected of me." Vincent nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's why I'm offering you this choice. I want you to know that you don't have to stay in this life. You can have more, but you need to decide what that looks like for you." The idea of breaking free from her role as a maid was both liberating and overwhelming. What would she do with this newfound freedom? What could she become if she wasn't bound by the limitations of her current life? The possibilities seemed endless, and yet the fear of the unknown held her back. "I'll think about it," Tasha finally said, her words filled with a sense of resolve. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'll think about it." Vincent smiled, a rare soft expression crossing his face. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here if you have any questions." He paused for a moment, then added, "And remember, you are more than just a maid, Tasha. Never forget that." As he turned to leave, Tasha sat in silence, the weight of his words settling over her. She had spent so long living for others, but now she was faced with the possibility of living for herself. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also one that made her feel something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope for a future that was hers to shape. Hope for a life beyond the walls of the mansion. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and contemplation. Tasha found herself thinking constantly about Vincent's offer, weighing the pros and cons of taking a step into the unknown. Could she really leave behind the life she had always known? Could she break free from the chains of servitude and find something more? The questions plagued her, but there was one thing she was sure of. She could no longer go on pretending that the life she had was enough. She deserved more, and for the first time, she was ready to claim it. As the days went by, Tasha began to notice subtle changes in how Vincent interacted with her. He seemed more present, more engaged in her work, offering her words of encouragement and praise whenever she did something well. It was small, but it was enough to remind her that his offer was not just a passing gesture. He truly saw her potential. One evening, as Tasha was cleaning the hallway near Vincent's office, he appeared in the doorway, as if waiting for her. "Tasha," he called, his voice low but warm. She looked up, startled by his presence. "Yes, sir," she replied, unsure of what to expect. "Have you had any more thoughts about my offer?" he asked, his gaze steady and searching. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I've been thinking about it a lot. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I can't stay here forever, not like this." Vincent's eyes softened, and he stepped closer. "Then let's figure it out together," he said, his voice reassuring. "You don't have to do this alone." Tasha felt a swell of gratitude in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the brink of something new, something better. The fear that had once held her back began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of excitement. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Tasha felt ready to face it. With Vincent's support, she knew she had the strength to create a life that was truly her own. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone with potential, someone who mattered. And that was the first step toward a new beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha found herself caught between the life she had always known and the life Vincent had offered her. She had never imagined that a moment of kindness could alter the course of her future, but here she was, contemplating a decision that seemed impossible just a few months ago. The mansion, with its towering walls and lavish decor, felt different now. It was no longer just the place where she worked. It was the place where she could become someone else. Someone more. The weight of Vincent's offer hung heavily on her, but there was still so much uncertainty. What would happen if she took the leap? What would become of her if she left behind the life of servitude and embraced something unknown? Tasha couldn't help but wonder if Vincent truly understood the complexity of her life, the struggles she had faced, the years spent in the shadows. But every time she looked into his eyes, she saw something different. It wasn't just the gaze of a powerful man. It was the gaze of someone who saw her, who recognized her worth in a way no one else ever had. Slowly, as the days passed, Tasha began to see her own worth reflected in the way Vincent treated her. It wasn't just about the work she did, It was about who she was as a person. One afternoon, while she was working in the garden, carefully trimming the hedges, Vincent approached her again. She had grown accustomed to his presence, but today it felt different. He wasn't just passing by, he was making a point to stop. He leaned against the stone wall, watching her as she worked. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" Vincent asked, his voice soft, yet full of meaning. Tasha paused for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected him to approach her so directly, but then again, he had always been a man who acted without hesitation. "Yes," she admitted, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I've been thinking about it a lot." "And," he pressed gently, "what have you decided?" Tasha took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so many years burying her dreams, her hopes for something better, and now that the opportunity was right in front of her, she couldn't ignore it any longer. "I don't know what the future holds," she said slowly, "but I want to try. I want to see if there's something more out there for me. I don't want to stay stuck in this life forever." Vincent's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she saw something in him that resembled pride. "Good," he said simply. "You don't have to stay stuck. You're better than this, Tasha. You've always been better than this." His words were like a balm to her wounded soul, healing parts of her she hadn't realized were broken. Tasha felt a surge of emotion as she looked up at him, realizing that this was her moment, her chance to take control of her destiny. "I don't know where this path will lead," she continued, "but I'm ready to take the first step. I'm ready to see what's out there, even if I'm scared." Vincent straightened up, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's the spirit," he said. "Fear is natural, but it's the courage to face it that defines us. And you, Tasha, you have that courage." In that moment, Tasha knew that she was not just leaving behind a life of servitude. She was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one where she could be someone else entirely. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a woman with potential, with the power to shape her own future. Over the next few weeks, Vincent began to slowly integrate Tasha into more significant roles. It wasn't an immediate leap into power, but it was a start. He offered her the opportunity to take on new responsibilities, ones that stretched her beyond her comfort zone. Tasha was learning new skills, gaining confidence with each task. Every time she succeeded, she felt the weight of her old life, the life she had left behind, slipping further away. It wasn't easy. There were days when doubt crept in, and she wondered if she had made the right choice. There were moments when she missed the certainty of her old routine, the predictability of her work. But in those moments, she would remember Vincent's words, the quiet encouragement he had offered, and she would press on. One evening, as Tasha was organizing a set of documents in Vincent's office, he appeared at the door once again, this time without any fanfare. He had a thoughtful expression on his face, and his gaze met hers as he entered the room. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice warm but steady. Tasha paused, considering the question. It was simple, but it held so much weight. I'm starting to feel like I belong here," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty, but also hope. Vincent nodded, his face showing a rare moment of vulnerability. "You do belong here, Tasha. You always have." His words, though simple, felt like a validation of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to believe that this moment was real. For so long, she had been invisible, dismissed as nothing more than a maid. But now, here she was, standing in the presence of a man who saw her, who believed in her. And for the first time, Tasha believed in herself too. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha's confidence continued to grow. She was no longer just a maid in the shadows of the mansion. She was someone with a purpose, someone who was becoming more than she ever thought possible. And it was all because of the man who had offered her a chance to step out of the shadows and into the light. Vincent had changed her life, but it was Tasha who was changing herself. She had the power to shape her future, and nothing could stop her now. As the weeks passed, Tasha felt herself becoming more and more comfortable in her new role. Vincent had kept his word, guiding her through new tasks, giving her more responsibility with each passing day. She was learning not only the intricacies of managing the mansion, but also how to command respect in a way she had never imagined possible. She was no longer just the invisible maid. She was a woman with purpose. Vincent's trust in her was a gift, but it also came with a weight she hadn't expected. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when she still felt the sharp sting of her past, moments when the voices of doubt crept in and reminded her of the life she had left behind. But every time she thought about giving up, she would remember the way Vincent had looked at her that night, the way he had seen her potential when no one else had. That thought was enough to keep her going. One morning, as Tasha was sorting through the mail in Vincent's office, she found herself lost in thought when the door opened. She looked up to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor giving way to something more deliberate. "Tasha," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need to talk." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She had been doing everything she could to prove herself, but she wondered if she had made a mistake somewhere along the way. "Of course, sir," she replied, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He walked over to the desk, his steps purposeful. "I've been keeping an eye on your progress," he began, looking at her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "You've been doing well, better than I expected. But there's more to this than just proving you can handle the tasks." Tasha frowned, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I don't understand, sir. Have I done something wrong?" Vincent shook his head, his lips curling into a small smile. "No, nothing like that. You've done everything I've asked, and more. But I think it's time to talk about what comes next." Tasha's mind raced. What did he mean by that? Was this the end of her journey? Was she about to be pushed back into her old life, just when she thought she was starting to break free? "What do you mean, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent paused for a moment, as if contemplating the best way to continue. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke. "I've been offered a position that requires someone I can trust. A position that's more than just managing the estate, more than just overseeing the staff. It's a role that requires leadership, and I think you're the one for it." Tasha blinked, trying to process his words. Leadership? Could he really mean her? Could she possibly be ready for something like that? "But why me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Vincent gave her a steady look, his eyes unwavering. "Because you've proven yourself. You've shown me that you have the strength to rise above what others expect of you. You've done more than just follow orders. You've taken initiative. And that's what makes you different." Tasha's heart raced, her mind struggling to catch up with the gravity of what Vincent was offering. She had always known that this job was her chance for something better, but she hadn't truly believed it could lead to this. "But I'm still just a maid," Tasha murmured, the words heavy in her mouth. "You were never just a maid," Vincent replied, his voice low and firm. "You've always been more. Now, it's time for you to take that next step. I need someone who can help me lead. Someone who can manage more than just the household staff. Someone who can represent me in meetings, in negotiations, and in decisions that affect the future of this business." Tasha felt as though the room was spinning. Was this really happening? Was she being offered the kind of life she had always dreamed of but never thought she would have? "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice startling even herself. Vincent took a step forward, his eyes softening. "You can. I believe in you, Tasha, and that's why I'm offering you this chance." She stood there, the weight of his words settling in her chest. The fear, the uncertainty, all of it seemed to meld away in the face of something she never thought possible: trust. She had never been given a chance like this before. She had never been seen as someone capable of more than just cleaning, serving, and staying out of the way. But Vincent saw something in her, something that gave her the courage to believe in herself. "I'll do it," she said quietly, her voice full of determination. "I'll take the position." Vincent smiled, the pride in his eyes unmistakable. "Good," he said. "You won't regret this." As the days passed, Tasha's new role began to take shape. She wasn't just managing the staff anymore. She was making decisions, coordinating tasks, and representing Vincent in meetings. It was overwhelming at times, but with each new challenge, she felt herself growing stronger, more capable. Vincent's confidence in her gave her the courage to step up in ways she never imagined she could. She was no longer just a maid in the background. She was someone who had a voice, someone who could make a difference. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was living the life she had always deserved, a life of respect, of purpose, and of possibility. The days grew longer as Tasha settled into her new role, the weight of her responsibilities gradually becoming more familiar with each passing day. It wasn't easy, and the tasks at hand were far more complicated than she had ever imagined. She was no longer just managing the staff and overseeing the estate. Now, she was involved in important meetings, making decisions that affected not only the household but also Vincent's business dealings. At first, she doubted herself. How could someone like her, a former maid, possibly step into such a prominent role? But as Vincent had promised, she was becoming more than she ever thought she could be. Slowly, she began to understand the intricacies of the business, learning how Vincent's empire was built and what it took to keep it running smoothly. She found herself accompanying him to meetings, learning the art of negotiation, and even overseeing some of the more delicate affairs that Vincent trusted her with. She was growing in ways she hadn't thought possible. There were moments when the pressure felt overwhelming, when the fear of failure crept in, but then she would remember Vincent's words. "I believe in you, Tasha." It was a simple phrase, but it had the power to calm her nerves, to remind her that she had what it took to succeed. Vincent had put his faith in her, and that alone made her want to rise to the occasion. One afternoon, as Tasha was reviewing a set of documents in Vincent's office, he entered, his usual composed demeanor replaced by a hint of urgency. "Tasha," he began, his voice firm, "I need you to handle something for me. It's important." She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. She had gotten used to the responsibility he placed on her, but there was something different in his tone this time. "Of course," she replied, setting the papers aside and focusing on him. "What do you need?" Vincent walked over to the desk, his expression serious. "There's a new deal on the table, one that could change the direction of the business. I need someone I trust to manage the details. You're the one I want to handle this." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. This was no small task. This was a decision that could shape the future of the empire. "Are you sure I'm the right person?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly despite herself. Vincent nodded without hesitation. "I've seen how you've handled everything so far. You're ready for this." He paused for a moment, then added, "And I believe in your judgment." Tasha took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. This was her chance to prove not just to Vincent, but to herself, that she was capable of handling more than she had ever dreamed. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady now, filled with resolve. Vincent gave her a small smile, the rare kind that reached his eyes. "I know you won't. You've earned this, Tasha." With that, he handed her the documents, a stack of papers that represented a pivotal moment in the business. Tasha took them with a nod, her heart racing with the responsibility that now lay in her hands. Over the next few days, she threw herself into the work, studying the details of the deal and meeting with various parties involved. She had never been more focused, and she knew that this was the moment that would define her future. Every decision she made would have consequences, and she couldn't afford to make a mistake. As the deal moved forward, Tasha found herself in more and more high-stakes situations, making calls, organizing meetings, and ensuring that everything was falling into place. It wasn't long before she began to realize just how much she had grown. The girl who had once feared the very thought of taking charge was now confidently stepping into the shoes of a leader. The change wasn't just external, it was internal as well. She no longer saw herself as the maid who had stumbled into a lucky break. She was a woman who had earned her place, who had proven herself capable and worthy of the opportunities she had been given. One evening, as the deal was finalized, Vincent called her into his office once again. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city, but when he turned to face her, there was something different in his eyes. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "The deal went through, and it's a success." Tasha felt a rush of pride flood through her, but she kept her composure. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice steady. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Vincent shook his head, his smile soft. "No, Tasha, you did this. You took the reins and made it happen." He paused for a moment, then added, "I'm proud of you." The words hit Tasha harder than she expected. She had never heard them before, at least not in the way Vincent meant them. She wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was a part of something bigger, something that she had helped create. And for the first time, she realized that she truly belonged here. It wasn't just the job that had changed her, it was the confidence she had found within herself. She was no longer the quiet maid, standing in the shadows. She was a woman with a future she had built with her own hands. The journey had been long, and there had been times when she doubted herself. But now, with Vincent's words echoing in her mind, she knew she had found her place. And with that, Tasha Williams took her first steps into a future that was entirely her own. Tasha stood in front of the grand mirror in her room, adjusting the hem of the dress she had just put on. It was a soft shade of blue, elegant and simple, but it felt different on her. She had never worn anything like this before. It was a far cry from the plain Maid uniforms she had worn for so long. Tonight, she was going to attend an event, not as a servant, but as a guest, an equal. Vincent had invited her to accompany him to a dinner he was hosting for business partners, a decision that had taken her completely by surprise. At first, she had hesitated, unsure of whether she should attend. The idea of being seen in the world of high society still felt surreal to her. But Vincent had insisted, saying it was time for her to step into a new role, to be seen for the woman she had become. And so, here she was, standing in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of someone who no longer felt like the person she once was. The woman in the mirror was different. She was confident, poised, and ready to face the world on her terms. The knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find Vincent standing there, dressed impeccably in a sharp black suit, his gaze taking her in. "You look stunning," he said, his voice warm but with an edge of admiration that made her heart race. Tasha felt her cheeks flush, but she smiled nonetheless. "Thank you, sir," she said, unsure of what to say next. Vincent." She corrected herself, her heart beating faster as she realized how much had changed between them. "You've come a long way, Tasha," Vincent said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "This is just the beginning. You've earned your place here, and I'm proud of everything you've accomplished." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had worked so hard to prove herself, but hearing it from Vincent, someone who had seen her potential when no one else had, made it feel real. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't think I could have done it without you." Vincent gave her a small smile. "You've always had it in you. I just helped you see it." He held out his arm. "Shall we?" Tasha took his arm, and they made their way down the hall to the waiting car. The drive to the event was smooth, and as they arrived at the venue, Tasha couldn't help but marvel at the grandeur of it all. The building was stunning, a mix of modern elegance and timeless beauty. It was a far cry from the simple home she had grown up in, a world away from the life she had known before. As they entered the venue, Tasha's nerves began to settle. Vincent led her through the crowd, introducing her to important people, business partners, and colleagues, all of whom treated her with respect and kindness. It was a strange feeling, being acknowledged in a way she had never experienced. She had always been on the outside looking in, but now, she was part of it. Throughout the evening, Tasha found herself engaged in conversations, her confidence growing with every exchange. Vincent's presence was always nearby, a quiet reassurance that gave her the strength to navigate this new world. He had always been a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. Every time someone praised her for her insights or admired her for her poise, she saw the subtle pride in Vincent's eyes. It was more than she had ever expected. As the evening wore on, Vincent pulled her aside for a moment, away from the bustle of the party. "You've done well tonight," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I knew you could handle this." Tasha looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never thought I'd be here, Vincent. I never thought I could be a part of this world." Vincent's expression softened. "You've always belonged here, Tasha. You just needed to realize it." He paused for a moment before continuing. "And I'm glad you did." Tasha smiled, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. She wasn't just standing in the world of the wealthy and powerful anymore. She was walking alongside them, on equal footing. It was a world she had never thought she would be part of, but now, it was hers. As the night came to an end, Vincent escorted Tasha back to the car. "I hope this evening showed you what you're capable of," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You have so much potential, Tasha. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than you are." Tasha nodded, the words sinking deep into her heart. "I won't," she said quietly. "I've learned a lot from you." The drive back to the mansion was quiet, but the weight of the evening's events hung in the air, a reminder of just how far Tasha had come. She had stepped into a new chapter of her life, one where she was no longer invisible, no longer just the maid. She was someone who mattered. And as she looked out the window at the city lights, Tasha realized that this was just the beginning. She was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed the dinner event were a whirlwind for Tasha. The offer Vincent had given her wasn't just a chance to work in a new capacity. It was a complete shift in her life. Every day she was given new challenges, new responsibilities, each one pushing her further out of her comfort zone. She was no longer just managing the staff or organizing the estate. Now, she was in meetings with high-profile people, making decisions that had real consequences. At first, it felt overwhelming. Tasha had spent so much of her life simply surviving, doing what was necessary to get by. But now, she was making decisions that affected the business, the people around her, and even Vincent's reputation. She had never imagined that a life like this could be hers. Vincent continued to guide her, offering advice when needed and always showing her that he believed in her. But there were times when Tasha felt the weight of everything on her shoulders. It wasn't just about doing her job anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could handle it. There were moments when doubt crept in. She wondered if she was truly capable of stepping into this new role, or if she was just a temporary placeholder in Vincent's world. But each time she hesitated, she remembered his words. "You've always belonged here, Tasha." Those words were a lifeline, a reminder that she was more than just the maid she had been. She was capable of so much more. As time passed, Tasha began to see the impact of her decisions. The business was thriving, and her efforts had played a significant part in that success. Vincent trusted her judgment, and more importantly, she had begun to trust herself. One afternoon, after a particularly successful negotiation with a partner who had been difficult to deal with, Vincent called her into his office. She could feel the pride in his voice as he praised her for the work she had done. "You handled that meeting flawlessly," he said, looking at her with approval. "You've come a long way, Tasha." The words hit her hard. She had worked so hard to prove herself, and to hear Vincent acknowledge her growth in such a way made everything feel worth it. "Thank you," she said quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Vincent's eyes softened as he gave her a small smile. "You've earned this, Tasha. You're no longer just following orders. You're making decisions that matter." Tasha felt a rush of emotion as she stood there, taking in his words. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned the house, who did the tasks no one else wanted to do. She was someone who had earned her place, someone who was making a real difference. But as she looked at Vincent, she couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The future seemed wide open, full of possibilities. But there was still a part of her that was uncertain, still unsure of how far she could truly go. "What's next?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "That's up to you," he said. "You've proven yourself capable. Now it's time to decide what you want from this life." His words hung in the air, a challenge and an opportunity all at once. Tasha thought about it for a moment. She had never allowed herself to think about what she wanted before. She had always focused on surviving, on making it through each day. But now, as she stood in front of Vincent, she realized that she had the power to shape her future. "I want to make a difference," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I want to help this business grow, but I also want to make sure that I'm doing something meaningful." Vincent nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "That's the spirit," he said. "You're not just a part of this business, Tasha. You're becoming a leader, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to grow into that role." Tasha felt a surge of confidence. She was ready to take on whatever came next, ready to continue proving to herself that she was more than just the maid she had once been. She had come so far, and now, with Vincent's continued support, she knew she could go even further. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha took on more and more responsibility. She was no longer just overseeing the staff. She was managing entire projects, making decisions that impacted the future of the business. She was becoming a key figure in Vincent's world, someone he could rely on, and someone the others respected. One evening, as the sun set over the mansion, Tasha stood by the window in her office, looking out at the city below. She could hardly believe how far she had come. The woman who had once felt invisible, who had lived in the shadows of others, was now standing at the forefront of something great. She had made it. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a leader, a trusted member of Vincent's team, and someone who had the power to shape her own destiny. And as she looked out at the city lights, Tasha realized that this was only the beginning. She had a future ahead of her, one that was hers to create. No longer bound by the past, she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way and continue to prove that she was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. Tasha sat at her desk, reviewing the latest set of reports, her mind focused on the numbers and projections before her. It had been a few months since the dinner event, and since then, her role had evolved even further. She was no longer just managing day-to-day operations. She was helping Vincent make major decisions about the direction of the business. The power she had once feared was now something she wielded with growing confidence. The mansion, the business, the people, everything was changing. She had changed. It was a quiet evening, and the office was filled with the soft hum of the city in the distance. The constant noise of the outside world never seemed to intrude here, in the heart of Vincent's empire. Tasha had found a new sense of purpose in her work, but there were times when doubt would creep in. Was she truly prepared for everything that came with the responsibility? She glanced at the clock. It was getting late. She'd been working for hours, but the tasks never seemed to end. The world she was now part of moved at a relentless pace, and she had to keep up. As she stood and stretched, trying to shake the fatigue from her body, her thoughts wandered to Vincent. He had been more distant lately, consumed by business dealings and the weight of his responsibilities. He had always been a man of few words, but the subtle changes in his demeanor had not gone unnoticed by Tasha. They had spoken less, and when they did, the conversations had been more business than anything else. He had been under a lot of stress, and she understood that, but it left her wondering where they stood. Her feelings for him had evolved over time, but she had always kept them to herself. She wasn't sure what to do with those feelings, whether she should express them or keep them buried, hidden behind the walls she had built over the years. Her thoughts were interrupted when the door to her office opened, and Vincent stepped in. His usual calm presence filled the room, but there was something different about him tonight. He looked tired, his normally impeccable suit slightly rumpled, and his eyes were clouded with something that wasn't quite his usual sharp focus. "Tasha," he said, his voice low, "I need your help." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was clear. Tasha looked up, a sense of urgency rising in her chest. "What's wrong?" she asked, standing quickly. Vincent took a seat across from her, his gaze distant. "I've been running into some problems with a few of our business partners," he began, his voice measured. "It's getting complicated, and I need someone I trust to help me navigate it." Tasha nodded, her mind immediately shifting into problem-solving mode. "I'm here for you, Vincent. What do you need me to do?" Vincent met her gaze, his expression serious. "I need you to take a more active role in these negotiations. I can't do it alone. I need you by my side, helping me steer this in the right direction." The weight of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known that she was trusted, but this was different. This was a direct invitation to step into a world that she had only observed from the outside. The stakes were higher now, and she would be right in the middle of it all. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I won't let you down." Vincent gave a slight nod, his expression softening ever so slightly. "I know you won't." As the days passed, Tasha found herself thrown into a whirlwind of high-stakes negotiations and business decisions. The power dynamics between her and the other business leaders were complex, but Tasha held her own. She was becoming more than just Vincent's trusted ally. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with in her own right. One afternoon, after an exhausting meeting, Tasha found herself sitting in the office with Vincent, going over the details of a new proposal. The tension between them had been building for days, a quiet undercurrent that neither of them had addressed. She was acutely aware of the unspoken things hanging between them, the words that neither of them dared to say. Vincent paused, his fingers tapping on the desk as he studied her. "You've done a great job, Tasha," he said, breaking the silence. "I knew I could count on you." The praise was rare, and it warmed her chest. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Vincent, is everything okay?" He looked at her, his eyes guarded, and for a long moment, he didn't respond. She could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air, and she wondered if he would open up to her. Finally, he spoke. "It's been a lot," he said quietly. "Running this empire, managing everything, it's exhausting." Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. She had never seen Vincent like this, never imagined that he would share something so personal with her. "You're doing more than the right thing," Tasha said softly. "You've built something incredible, Vincent. Don't forget that." He looked at her, his gaze softening, and for a moment, Tasha saw a glimpse of the man beneath the hardened exterior. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, a man who had built everything on his own. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Tasha." The words hit her harder than she expected. They were simple, yet they carried a depth of meaning she hadn't fully realized until now. She wasn't just part of his team. She was someone who had become integral to his life. As the days passed, Tasha and Vincent continued to work closely together. The connection between them had deepened, and though neither of them spoke of it, there was a silent understanding between them. Tasha had found a new sense of purpose in Vincent's world, and in return, Vincent had found someone who could truly stand by his side, not just as an employee, but as a partner. She had come a long way from the woman who had once been invisible, and as she looked at her reflection in the mirror that evening, she saw a woman who was capable of anything. She had proven it to herself, and she had proven it to Vincent. She was no longer the woman who had lived in the shadows. She was someone who was stepping into the light, ready to embrace whatever came next. Tasha stood in the expansive conference room, staring at the city skyline through the large windows. The night had fallen, and the lights from the buildings below twinkled like stars, but her focus wasn't on the view. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on everything she had accomplished and everything she had yet to face. The pressure had been building in recent weeks, the weight of her new role heavier than ever. Every day, Vincent placed more trust in her, and with that trust came more responsibility. She was no longer just a participant in the business. She was a decision-maker, a leader in her own right. The realization hit her often, usually when she least expected it, as it did now, standing in this room, filled with business partners and employees who relied on her judgment. A part of her still couldn't believe how far she had come. Not so long ago, she had been cleaning the mansion floors, unseen and unheard, and now, here she was, on the brink of something much bigger. A knock on the door brought her back to reality, and she turned to see Vincent enter. His presence was as commanding as ever, but there was something different in his demeanor. Tonight, his face was more serious than usual, his jaw set in a way that suggested he was carrying a burden. Tasha raised an eyebrow, concerned. "Vincent, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice full of quiet concern. He met her gaze, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something behind his eyes, something that wasn't his usual cool composure. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone more serious than she had ever heard it. He gestured for her to take a seat, and they both sat at the large table in the center of the room. "What's going on?" Tasha asked, her heart beginning to race. Vincent hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's a situation," he began. "Something unexpected came up in the business. One of our competitors has made a move that threatens our plans." Tasha listened intently, her mind already running through the possibilities. She knew how ruthless the business world could be, but Vincent's calm demeanor usually meant he had everything under control. "What kind of move?" she asked. "It's not just business," Vincent replied, his voice low. "It's personal." Tasha's brow furrowed. "Personal? How?" Vincent's eyes met hers, and she could see the weight of the situation in them. "I've been in this game long enough to know when someone is trying to make a power play. But this is different. This person has been targeting my family, and I'm afraid it's about to escalate." Tasha's stomach tightened. She had seen Vincent as the untouchable figure, the man who controlled everything around him. But now, hearing him speak of something personal, something that involved his family, she realized that even someone like him had vulnerabilities. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Vincent paused before answering. "I need you to handle the details. I can't focus on the business side of this right now, and I trust you to manage it." Tasha's mind raced as she processed his words. "You want me to take the lead on this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Vincent said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I trust you, Tasha. You've proven yourself time and time again, and this is the next step." His words were both a challenge and an opportunity. Tasha knew this was no ordinary task. This wasn't just about managing the estate or making business deals. This was something personal, something that could change everything. I won't let you down, she said, her voice filled with resolve. I'll handle it. Vincent nodded, his face softening for a moment. I know you will. As he left the room, Tasha sat in silence, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. She had been given a chance to prove herself in a way she never had before, but the stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about business. This was about loyalty, trust, and something much bigger. The next few days were a blur as Tasha worked tirelessly to gather information, coordinate with key players, and put a plan into motion. The pressure was relentless, but she embraced it. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first started in this world. She had learned so much, and now, she was using everything she had learned to navigate a situation that could very well change the course of Vincent's empire. As she sat in her office late one evening, reviewing the final details of her plan, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw Vincent's name. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered the call. Tasha, Vincent's voice came through, his tone as steady as ever. The time has come. Are you ready? She took a deep breath, her pulse quickening. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. I'm ready, she replied, her voice unwavering. Let's do this. In the days that followed, Tasha executed the plan with precision. Every move was calculated, every decision made with care. And in the end, it paid off. The threat was neutralized, and Vincent's empire remained intact. When it was all over, Vincent called her into his office once again. You did it, he said, his voice filled with a rare sense of pride. You handled everything. Tasha smiled, the weight of the past few weeks lifting off her shoulders. I couldn't have done it without your trust, she said. Vincent's expression softened. No, Tasha, you did this on your own. You've proven, once again, that you're more than capable. In that moment, Tasha realized just how far she had come. She had faced challenges that seemed impossible and had come out on top. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a leader, someone who had earned her place at Vincent's side. And as she looked at him, she knew that this was only the beginning. The future was hers to shape, and nothing could stop her now. Tasha sat in the corner of her office, the soft hum of the city below her providing a quiet backdrop to her thoughts. It had been several weeks since the intense business dealings with the competitor, and she was still processing everything that had happened. The weight of the responsibility Vincent had placed on her had only grown heavier, but it was a challenge she had learned to embrace. She had faced the fire and come out stronger for it. She had proven herself, not just to Vincent, but to herself as well. Yet, the toll it had taken on her wasn't something she could ignore. Her thoughts drifted to Vincent, the man who had been both a mentor and a constant presence in her life. Over the months, their professional relationship had evolved into something more complex, something deeper. Tasha wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had found herself drawn to him in a way that went beyond respect. She couldn't deny it anymore. She had feelings for him, feelings that she had kept buried out of respect for the boundaries that existed between them. Vincent had always been the one in control, the one who commanded the room, and Tasha had always kept her distance. But as the days passed, it became harder to ignore the connection between them. They had grown close, their conversations more personal, their interactions more frequent. There were moments, fleeting but significant, where the walls between them seemed to come down. And in those moments, Tasha saw a side of Vincent she had never seen before. He was still the powerful Mafia boss, but there was vulnerability in his eyes that he rarely allowed others to see. One evening, after a long day of meetings and decisions, Vincent had asked her to join him for a drink in his private study. It was something they had done before, but this time, there was an unspoken tension in the air. As she walked into the room, she saw Vincent standing by the bar, his back turned as he poured a drink. The soft lighting in the room cast shadows across his face, adding to the intimate atmosphere. Tasha, he said without turning around. Come in. I thought we could talk for a bit. She nodded and stepped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Of course, Vincent, she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. He handed her a glass of wine, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. It was a small gesture, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She took the glass and sat down on the leather couch across from him. How's everything going? Vincent asked, his tone casual, but there was something more beneath it, an edge that she couldn't quite place. "It's been busy," she said, taking a sip of the wine. "But we're moving in the right direction." Vincent nodded, his eyes narrowing as if he was contemplating something. "You've done well," he said, his voice softer now. "Better than I ever expected." Tasha looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've learned a lot from you." Vincent's gaze softened, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their unspoken thoughts filling the space between them. It was then that Tasha realized how much she had come to depend on him, not just for guidance in her career, but in ways she hadn't fully understood. She had always thought of herself as independent, but in this moment, she saw just how much Vincent had shaped her, how much he had become a part of her world. Vincent set his glass down and moved toward her, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of her, standing so close that Tasha could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Tasha," he said, his voice low and steady, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it?" Vincent hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, his words slow and deliberate. "I've come to realize that you're not just an employee to me, Tasha. You've become someone I trust, someone I can rely on." Tasha's heart raced as she listened to his words, a mix of confusion and anticipation swirling inside her. "I appreciate that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what does that mean?" Vincent took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for what he was about to say. "It means that I care about you, Tasha," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "More than I've ever cared about anyone in this business." The words hung in the air, heavy and significant. Tasha's mind raced as she processed what he had just said. She had never expected this, never thought that Vincent, so controlled, so focused on his empire, could feel this way about her. She didn't know what to say, how to respond. The silence between them was palpable. Vincent stepped back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "I've always kept my distance from people," he continued, his voice more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "But with you, it's different. I don't know why, but it is." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that there was something more between them, but hearing it from Vincent, hearing him admit it, made everything feel real. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have something more than just a professional relationship. "I've always respected you, Vincent," she said softly. "But I never expected this." Vincent smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But here we are." The moment hung in the air between them, charged with emotion and possibility. Tasha didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she realized that whatever it was, she was ready to face it. With Vincent by her side, she felt like she could conquer anything. The world, once so uncertain and intimidating, now felt like a place she could navigate with confidence. And as she looked at Vincent, she realized that they were no longer just two people in a business. They were something more, something she wasn't sure she fully understood yet, but something she was willing to explore. The future was still unknown, but it felt less daunting now. She was no longer alone in it. And that thought gave her a sense of peace she hadn't known she was missing. Tasha sat by the window, the city lights below her flickering like distant stars. The night was calm, yet her mind was anything but. Over the past few weeks, everything had changed, her role, her confidence, and most of all, her connection with Vincent. The evening they had shared in his study, the way he had opened up to her, had left her with a sense of peace she had never felt before. But now, as she reflected on everything that had happened, she realized just how much she had come to care for him. The professional distance that had once been so clear between them was now blurred, replaced by something deeper. And yet, she still wasn't sure what it meant for their future. She had never thought she could have both power and something personal with Vincent. But now, she had to decide what she wanted. The weight of it all pressed heavily on her. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. As if on cue, the door to her office opened, and Vincent stepped inside. His usual confidence was still present, but there was something different about him tonight. He looked at her with a softness that was almost unrecognizable. "Tasha," he said quietly, "can we talk?" His voice had a gentleness to it that made her heart flutter. "Of course," she said, standing up and meeting his gaze. He walked over to her, his steps measured but not rushed. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, as if gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about everything lately, Vincent said finally, his eyes searching hers. About the business, about us. Tasha's pulse quickened. She had felt this shift between them, but hearing him speak about it made it real. What do you mean, about us? She asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Vincent paused for a moment, his gaze never leaving hers. You've changed everything for me, Tasha, he said, his voice low, but with undeniable sincerity. The way I see things. The way I feel. I've spent so much of my life building this empire, but I've never been able to trust anyone the way I trust you. The words hung in the air, heavy and meaningful. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. Vincent, she whispered, unsure of how to respond. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. I want you to know, this isn't just about business anymore. It's about something more. Something real. Tasha could feel her breath catch in her throat. She had always respected Vincent, admired him for his strength and resilience. But now, as he stood in front of her, offering her not just his trust, but something deeper, she realized how much she had come to care. For him, she had never expected this, never imagined that they could have something more than just a professional relationship. But now, standing in his presence, she saw the possibility of a future that was beyond anything she had ever dreamed. I've never been good at this, Vincent continued, his voice almost a whisper now. I've built my entire life around control, around power. But with you, I feel like I can let go. And I want to. I want to build something with you, something beyond all of this. Tasha felt a rush of emotion, hope, excitement, and something else she couldn't quite put into words. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely audible. Vincent took a deep breath, as if preparing himself. I'm offering you more than just a position here, Tasha. I'm offering you a partnership, a future. I want you by my side, not just in the business, but in everything. This isn't just about power anymore. It's about us, together. Tasha's heart raced. The weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes. It was more than she had ever hoped for. She had always been so careful, so focused on proving herself. But now, she was faced with something she had never expected. Could she have both the career and the personal connection she had longed for? Could she take this step with Vincent? I've always admired you, Vincent, Tasha said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. I never imagined that I would be standing here with you, like this. But now, I realize how much I've come to care for you too. Vincent's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a vulnerability in him. You're not just a part of my world, Tasha, he said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. You're a part of me. The words were simple, but they struck her deeply. This wasn't just about their business or their work. It was about something real, something genuine. For the first time, Tasha allowed herself to believe in the possibility of it all. She wasn't just the woman who had worked her way up from the shadows. She was someone who mattered, someone who had a place beside Vincent, not just as a colleague, but as something more. She could feel the future unfolding before her, and it no longer seemed as daunting as it once had. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they could build something lasting, something that went beyond the walls of the mansion or the business. I want that too, Tasha said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I want a future with you, Vincent. Vincent smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Then it settled, he said. We'll build that future, together. Tasha smiled back, her heart full of hope and possibility. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Vincent by her side, she knew she was ready for whatever came next.